A day after former NFL defensive end Greg Hardy released a statement saying he's excited to start his MMA career, Jay Glazer, a Fox Sports NFL insider with a prominent MMA presence, has taken a strong stance against Hardy's pursuits. I would be incredibly disappointed in any of my fellow MMA coaches and any promoters if they took Greg Hardy in and taught him a shred of our incredible sport. Many of us train women in self-defense specifically to help protect them versus domestic violence. Me and all my coaches at my gym do and take great pride in that. Competing in any sport is a privilege. Greg Hardy should not be granted that privilege. There are many beautiful arts taught in our sport, none of which should be afforded to him. Stephen A., do you agree with Jay Glazer?
1,000% I agree with Jay Glazer. In the interest of full disclosure, we don't see each other much, but Jay Glazer is my friend. I love this brother dearly. He is a good man. He always has been, and he's one of the best reporters this business has ever seen. I don't give a damn that he's worked for the other network. He and I go back to our days when he was at the New York Post, and I was at the New York Daily News as a high school sports writer. That's how far back Jay Glazer and I go. He's a special dude, and I know how much the sport of MMA means to him. He was there from the ground up when it was starving for recognition and credibility. He was in it, and he's been in it to win it from day one. Now, Max, Will, Molly, y'all remember my point about Greg Hardy yesterday. Without having spoken to Jay Glazer, because I haven't seen him in a while, without knowing his position, what was my number one concern, Max? What did I say? I said fear was my number one reaction, because this dude who seems undisciplined and unable to control himself and his emotions, okay, on the football field and evidently beyond, if you believe the bench judge that convicted him of assault after allegedly, I shouldn't say allegedly, damn it, he got convicted, throwing his girlfriend on a futon bed filled with rifles, slamming her arm down with a toilet bowl, grabbing her by the neck, threatening to kill her, even though he categorically denied it. He was found guilty by a judge during a bench trial. He appealed the decision in the state of North Carolina. You're allowed to appeal it and take it to a jury trial, at which time the woman that was the victim in all of this did not want to testify again and under oath. She didn't want to go through all of that, and ultimately the case was dropped. I said yesterday, fear was my number one reaction, because when you're talking about MMA, you're talking about requisite skills that you are taught that will make you even more of a lethal weapon. He's lethal enough being 6'4", 279 pounds, with the athleticism and the physical prowess that he already possesses. But now, to go to the MMA and to learn the requisite skills even more so would make him that much more dangerous. That essentially is what Jay Glazer alluded to with his statement. He is 1,000% correct. He is absolutely qualified, more so than anyone in this country as far as I'm concerned, because not only is he involved with the MMA, with his own gym and everything else, training athletes as well, but he's also an insider on the NFL. So he knows stuff about Greg Hardy most of us don't know. I would say I can't think of any individual more qualified than my man Jay Glazer to say what he said about Greg Hardy. I support him 1,000%. He is absolutely right.
So, I disagree.
Okay.
It's interesting when you speak for a living, when you do public speaking, one of the lessons you learn is people mostly just remember the first thing you say. And then whatever you have to back it up or to nuance it or caveat, good luck with that, because they hear the first. So this is what I want to start with. I grew up in Texas. There was a little bit of a chivalristic code in the way I grew up. And one of those things, beyond being hold the door for women, tell the truth, be honest, was never, ever, ever lay your hands on a woman.
Yep.
That's how I was raised, and that's what I believe. That's what I
Same
believe
here.
when this segment is over. That's what I believe when I went into it. But my main goal in this conversation isn't to prove I'm more against domestic violence than the next guy. And that's not my goal in any of our conversations. By the way, Stephen A., you and I have had race conversations. It's not my goal to come out of a segment having proven to everybody that I'm not a racist. I'm not.
Absolutely.
I don't need to prove
We talked about that. We talked about that.
Right.
You're absolutely correct.
So my goal is, let's get to what's interesting, what's thoughtful, What's smart, and here's the question when it comes to Greg Hardy and whether or not he should be allowed to participate in MMA, Max, is I also believe in second chances. President Obama on his ESPN town hall talked about this last night. I believe in it philosophically. I believe legally we have a debate about felons being more reintegrated into society and finding a place for them to be productive. So I come at this place where I'm like, well, what should Greg Hardy be exiled from? He shouldn't play football, according to many. He shouldn't be in MMA. What exactly is he allowed to participate in? Can he be in architecture? That's an art. Can he be a bricklayer? How many industries exile Greg Hardy for? And this is the other hairy thing, and you brought it up, Stephen A. He's legally not guilty. The legal system doesn't work like football. He's not 1-1. You know, in the end, after the appeal, he's not guilty. It doesn't mean he's innocent. I know the difference between innocent and not guilty. But if a guy's not guilty, but we all kind of live in this world where like, but we know, right? Then how do we apply that standard to a chosen profession for a man? How do we start saying you can't be this? You're exiled from this part of society. You can't be here. You can't do this. Based upon, right now, technically not guilty and philosophically not offering second chances, what are we telling people like Greg Hardy? Goodbye, get away from society. We don't have there's a special realm for you that I don't know exists yet.
I'll respond after Max.
I think that's a legitimate, those are all legitimate questions. Let me start with the first one. To Stephen A's point, Jay Glazer is uniquely positioned here as the hardest working guy in the business. Probably his guy is a tireless worker, really good guy. I've also known him for many years, though probably not as well as Stephen A does, but is also knows all about the NFL, knows all about MMA. And to answer the first question, what kind of occupations do people feel like maybe should have some sanctions against Greg Hardy or should have high barriers of entry? One of them might be fighting, you know, learning to use your body in ever more damaging and deadly ways. That may be one of them.
But even if that were true, even if that were true, Max, wouldn't it be a little bit of a hurdle, the fact that he's technically not guilty?
I want to go through that next, and then there's one last thing. We shouldn't have to publicly relitigate evidentiary standards every time something like this comes up. Let me explain what that means. Just because someone's accused of a serious crime, even if that crime is difficult to prove or they had just a good defense or the plaintiff didn't have a strong enough case, we shouldn't have to relitigate publicly, in other words, all decide again what constitutes guilt.
Right.
There is a legal system, to your point, in place that works very well. Nothing's perfect, but it works better than everything else, right? And you said that you know the difference between not guilty and innocent. They're two different things. But he was not found guilty. He is not, you know.
That's right.
Okay. So the question is, should he be shunned?
Right.
In the case of, now this gets to an MMA question. In the case of individuals, promoters, who run businesses, I don't have a problem if they in good conscience sit down and say, okay, do I think it's the morally upright thing to do to be in business with this person? And if they say yes, they review it and say yes, okay, that's their decision and they should go forward. And if they say no, don't, I think that's also fine for them, particularly in this industry, a fighting industry, considering the amount of evidence against Greg Hardy. And even though he's not guilty, we all see, I think many people see that there was stuff going on. Okay. That's not the way business works, though. Business generally is an amoral decision-making process. Not immoral, they're bad guys, but amoral. Morality doesn't usually is not the animating force in business. Making money is the animating force in business, and that's why I think it is fair if people like Jay Glazer say, okay, I'm in a media platform, I know both businesses,
need to chime in.
I have an idea about what's going on, and they're making a business decision, and I need to voice the moral concern.
Will, perhaps this is a rhetorical question, but I did mention that he was convicted by the judge during the bench trial, correct?
Right. Yes.
I mentioned that, right?
Yes.
If I remember correctly, that's a felon. That's a felony. And if you're convicted, I'm not sure you're allowed to carry a weapon if you're a convicted felon, which is what happened. Now, the case may have been overturned or whatever the case may be, but ultimately a bench judge convicted Greg Hardy. If you are convicted, why should somebody turn around and train you to hurt people? Now, listen, we're not saying, I've never, for the record, Will, I have never once said that Greg Hardy should not be back in the NFL. If the rules allow it, this is your profession. You earn a living playing football. That's what you do. But MMA is a different sport, which essentially gives you the license to assault people in the octagon. But the requisite skills it teaches you are applicable outside of the octagon. And when you take that into consideration and you listen to the source of this opinion, which is Jay Glazer, and you take all of those things into consideration, I don't think it's something that's easily ignored. I applaud your position, Will, when you talk about the land of second chances, because I religiously say that about the United States of America. We're supposed to be the land of second chances. Right. But at the same time, that's after you suffered consequences the first go round. And a lot of people will lament to you that Greg Hardy really didn't suffer. He didn't do any jail time. He didn't lose the money he was supposed to lose, because even when he was suspended for 10 games, that got reduced to 4 because retroactively it was ruled that Roger Goodell couldn't impose the kind of stiff punishment that he wanted to impose against Greg Hardy. Obviously, he became a member of the Dallas Cowboys. And so when you look at it from that perspective, there is something to speak about as it pertains to his punishment or lack thereof. And therefore, when you're talking about a second chance, as far as they're concerned, he wasn't denied the first chance.
Well, and I would point out, by the way, he's on his third or fourth chance at this point, right? He's not just on his second chance. And I know this has to be I know this has to be repeated over and over. If Greg Hardy is guilty of everything he's accused of, he's a bad person. I don't want to be on Greg Hardy's side. I don't want to defend him. But I see difficult questions that most, and many in the media, not Jay Glazer, not Stephen A. Smith, not Max Kellerman, don't want to get to, which is, how do you define a standard of guilt? What occupations do you exile from somebody from with what kind of standard for guilt? And most of the media, again, not Stephen A. Smith, Max Kellerman, or Jay Glazer, I don't know Jay Glazer, simply want to use these platforms to prove how virtuous they are. That's the safe thing to do, to always prove you're against domestic violence. Why don't you get some difficult questions, because these are hard to answer right here.
Real quick, can I just say something? So I covered the UFC for a long time, for 7 years. No Jay Glazer, worked with him. And I spoke to Rashad Evans, former light heavyweight champ, before the show. He'll fight middleweight 205. And he said, this is where I get what you're saying for second chances, right? So if it was any other sport, and basically what Rashad said is, knowing how to fight like we do is such a huge responsibility. And if someone who trains MMA has a very bad temper, that can be very dangerous. And if he doesn't have the ability to think before he acts, that he could definitely hurt someone in this sport. So that's someone who's fighting right now, and that's his concern.
I know we have to leave. Can I just say, since a little bit of a hard turn tonally? So Stephen A. Smith had his big moment last night on Jimmy Kimmel. Mine's today. Did you know this? I'm filling in on some radio show.
I know.
Like the Stephen A. Smith show. I don't know. It's some.
Yo, you better watch your mouth. You ain't doing it yet. You better pronounce my name accurately and appropriately before you miss out on this opportunity. Will Kane is filling in for me today while I fly back to the East Coast on my radio show, and they got the nerve to joke around with my name. You want to get yourself canceled?
Yes, just to
before
start.
You even
That's
start.
To start. 2 hours in your house, you have no idea the kind of damage I'm going to do today.
Well, keep in mind that it wasn't like somebody called up and said, "Hey, Will," it was Stephen A. that said, "Call Will."
I know.
Remember that.
I know.
Be thankful.
I know where it came from. I am.
Watch your mouth.
I am.
All right.
Stephen A. show in very good hands. Will, thank you so much for being with us.
You bet.
We'll check you later, 1 to 3.